In Matthew 7:12, we see what is referred to as the golden rule. It's likely that you've heard these words before. They've become commonplace, and not just in Christianity, but in our culture. That is to do unto others what we would have them do unto us. This is the golden rule. We teach it to kids that they should treat their friends as they want to be treated. And while this is a common verse, we often miss the true power that's in this verse, because even Jesus says that this sums up the entire Bible. And so in this video, what I want to do is I want to take a look at this verse with fresh eyes and see how the golden rule applies to our everyday lives. And I believe that this will challenge you in your faith. Let's start by looking at what Matthew 7:12 says. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. We'll dive into what this verse means in just a minute, but I want to start by looking at what the context surrounding this verse is. You see, we find Matthew 7:12 kind of at the end of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. This is the most famous sermon that Jesus gave in his time here on this earth. And throughout this message, what Jesus is doing is he's saying, this is how faith, this is how life really works. And what he says is shocking, it's countercultural, it's different than what any other teacher of his day was saying. And still to this day, what he says is some of the most practical and some of the most challenging verses in the entire Bible. And as we get towards the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7, what Jesus is challenging his listeners to 2,000 years ago and his readers, us today, to do is to not just be listeners to the word, but to be doers of the word. You see, when we follow Jesus, it's really not just about what we believe up here. It's about what we do in our lives. And we are to not just be listeners. We are to not just know what the Bible says, to know what Jesus said, but we are to live it out in our everyday life. And the golden rule that we're looking at in this video, that's exactly what Jesus is trying to get us to do. To live out some of the most important principles found in the entire Bible. Let's take a look at what Matthew 7:12 means. Jesus starts off this verse by saying, so in everything. Or in other translations, he says, therefore. And here's a helpful tip for you when you are reading the Bible. Whenever you see a therefore, you need to ask, what is it there for? Because typically this phrase is used when the author, or in this case Jesus, is drawing an important conclusion from the previous verses. And in this case, Jesus isn't just drawing a conclusion from the past couple verses, but actually the past few chapters. He's drawing a conclusion from what he's been saying in the Sermon on the Mount. In other words, what Jesus is about to say is really, really important. And we should lean into what he says next. Jesus continues by saying, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is the golden rule. This is a common teaching, not just in the church, but also in our culture. It's regularly taught that we should treat others how we want to be treated. But when Jesus originally said this was a revolutionary teaching. Now, he wasn't the first one to encourage people to evaluate their behavior in light of how they wanted others to treat them. Actually, this was taught in both Greek and Jewish cultures. Teachers and rabbis would teach this, but they would teach it from a negative sense. In other words, you shouldn't harm people because you don't want them to harm you. You shouldn't treat people badly because you don't want them to treat you badly. But what Jesus is doing here is he's taking that teaching a step further. He's saying not only should you not do bad to somebody because you don't want bad done to you, you should also do good to somebody because you want good done to you. He's taking a common belief, a common teaching, and he's taking it a step further. We should do good to others because that's what we want done to us. And in fact, it's not just what we want done to us, it's what Jesus has done for us. And I love how Mark Moore sums this up. He says this: the negative of this rule, sometimes called the silver rule, is The negative of this rule, sometimes called the silver rule, is frequently found in religious literature. Even Confucius supposedly said, "Do not to others what you would wish not done to yourself." And when the great Jewish Rabbi Hillel was asked by a would-be proselyte to expound the whole law while he stood on one leg, he replied, "What is hateful to you, do not do to anyone else." This is the whole law. All the rest is only commentary. The difference between these negative rules and Jesus' positive one is immediately apparent. We can do nothing and still completely satisfy the demands of the silver rule. But the golden rule demands my constant and utmost action. The golden rule is a call to action. For followers of Jesus, this is something that we are to continually do. It's not to simply avoid doing bad to somebody. It's to constantly be on the lookout for how we can love our neighbor well. The golden rule requires that we keep our eyes open and our hearts ready to love the people around us at a moment's notice. We are to do to others what Jesus has done for us. We are to show love to those around you. This isn't something that we can do on the sidelines. This requires us to get into the game. Jesus ends this verse by saying, "For this sums up the law and the prophets." And what Jesus is saying the entire Old Testament is based on this, that we should treat others how we want to be treated. We should love others as God has loved us. Later on in Matthew, Jesus goes on to give what's often called the Great Commandment, in which he says the most important commandment that we should do is to love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. The golden rule and the great commandment, they go hand in hand. And what's clear all throughout the Bible is that what Jesus expects his followers to do is to not only love him, but to love others. And here's sometimes a hard reality for us to really understand, and that is our love for God is shown in how we treat those around us. You cannot love God and hate your neighbor. You cannot love God and do evil to somebody else. Loving God requires that we also love those around us, and that includes the people who are easy to love and the people who are difficult to love. And we love them because Jesus first loved us. You see, the golden rule is a call for us to live out our faith. If we really believe that Jesus is who he says he is and did what he said he did, if he died and he rose again, then we ought to practice the golden rule by loving those around us. I want to end by looking at how Matthew 7:12 applies to our everyday lives. How can we actually apply the golden rule to what we're going to be doing tomorrow? And the clear answer is that we should look for ways we can love and serve those around us. But to do this, we need to think about ourselves less. Now, don't misunderstand what I just said. I didn't say that we ought to think less of ourselves, rather that we ought to think about ourselves less. You see, if you're anything like me, I spend most of my time thinking about me, my needs, my wants, my desires. But what Jesus is trying to do in our lives is to pull us out of this routine where we constantly think about ourselves to think about those around us. And the golden rule is a challenge to do just that. To stop thinking so much about what we need and to start thinking about what the people around us need. To start identifying ways that we can love and serve them. And so my challenge for you would be to identify maybe 2, maybe 3 people in your life that you can put this into practice with. And listen, sometimes I think we overcomplicate this. We think we have to go and do all these crazy things, but sometimes the golden rule is just being mindful of the people around us. It's bringing coffee to a coworker. It's helping a neighbor with some yard work. It's going out of our way to ask somebody how their day was and actually listen to what they say. It's showing others that we value them, we see them, and we love them. This is showing Christ's love to the people around us through our actions. So who are some people around you that you can show this kind of love to, who you can serve? And I would encourage you to maybe write down the names of 2 or 3 people that you can do this for and be praying for them. Be looking for ways that you can serve them, that you can love them, because this is what following Jesus requires us to do. It's not just what we know up here. It's about how we let what's up here affect how we go about our everyday lives. Listen, Jesus came into this world. He died on the cross. He provided a way for you to find peace, to find joy, to find true life. And that's not just a gift for you. It's also a gift for your neighbor, your friends, your family members, your coworkers. So who's around you? And how can you provide God's love to them? How can you show them God's love in practical ways? Go and do that. And you will be fulfilling what the Bible is asking of you. And my guess is you'll also leave fulfilled because you're living in God's purpose for you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that it challenged and encouraged you to live out your faith. If it did, would you leave a comment down below and let me know what God is saying to you through the Golden Rule? And also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so that you can stay up to date on future content that's coming out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.